we titled the show Tariffs Already Affecting the Housing Market, right?
Right.
Like this is when we first started thinking about tariffs affecting the housing market, we were like, well, supply chains and the cost of wood might go up and like all these different kind of like long tail things that would happen. We did not expect something so like direct to be, right? Like the Fed's decision on interest rates being blamed on this might be the most direct kind of like attribution to something that could impact the housing market, right?
Definitely.
Yeah.
Yes, this is having a the thought of tariffs may be the biggest effect of housing prices in 2025. Just the thought
Yeah.
of tariffs, not necessarily tariffs, because let's face it, some have been enacted and taken away and delayed and then pushed forward and increased. And then, nobody knows really how the tariffs are going to land. But the thought of tariffs, ultimately, what I think is happening is the Fed appreciates cover here.
Yeah.
The Fed appreciates cover for not dropping interest rates because what tariffs or the thought of tariffs create is some cover, right? We don't know how they're going to land, and the Fed is under a lot of pressure to be able to lower the Fed funds rate, which could lower interest rates. But what the Fed is really concerned about is they want to learn from their past mistake. If we go back, whatever it was, 3 years ago, 4 years ago, 5 years ago, the Feds thought that inflation was transitory at that time, which means that it was not going to be long lasting and it wouldn't have a big effect on the economy. They flat out got it wrong. And that's not just my opinion. The Fed has admitted that. They came out and they said, my bad. We didn't know what transitory meant before. We all know it now. And they got that wrong. So I think what they are trying to do is it certainly doesn't hurt for them to go a little bit longer to make sure that they have inflation under wraps and in check. Because I think if the Fed was to bring us right back to inflationary times again, that would be worse pain from the Fed's perspective and probably for our country than the pain of some labor losses, some job losses. Because the Fed does know if as soon as they start to drop the Fed funds rate, that is going to ignite this economy again. So I think when the Fed hears about tariffs, nobody really knows what tariffs mean for this. Nobody really knows how much it will lead to inflationary prices because of tariffs. Nobody knows if they're going to be enacted. But one thing that we know is that the thought of tariffs could lead to inflationary measures, and the Fed certainly doesn't mind the cover that is provided by giving them an out to not decrease the Fed funds rate. Does that make sense?
Yeah, that makes sense. What I'm hearing is essentially what's going through my head as you're telling me this. I'm like, is the Fed kind of happy with this kind of in between right now? Like, if the economy can be so strong and look so good with high interest rates, isn't it better for the Fed to be somewhere in the, hey, interest rates historically are not high, right? Like these interest rates, if you look back 30 years, they're not super, super high, right? They're high over the last 10 years. But I would imagine if I'm the Fed, I want space to be able to go down or up. Like if all I can do is go up or all I can do is go down, I'm just kind of like in an imbalanced position and I don't have levers to pull.
And that's where the Fed found themselves not too long ago.
That's what I'm saying.
They had no way to go down. And that's why they created other measures to inject money into the economy, which we don't always know what the consequences of those are. So yes, to your point, the Fed wants to have the maneuverability to be able to go up or down. But let's just go back. Let's give the Fed some credit here. I mean, just as much as they screwed it up by calling it transitory and missing on that, the Fed has done an incredible job of this soft landing.
We really have.
I mean, let's call a spade there, right? We have achieved, up till this point, we have achieved a soft landing, right? We have not been in a recession. Our economy continues to grow. Our labor market has been stronger than most expected. And so a lot of credit goes to the Fed actually managing that incredibly hard to manage ship in a direction. I think what the Fed's job here is a dual mandate. They need to keep inflation down. They want it to be at about 2%, and they need to keep unemployment low. And that's always been their mandate. The problem that the Fed has is that all the information that they need to make decisions is very lagging. So they have this huge cruise ship that we've got managing the US economy, and they have insufficient and slow data to be able to do it. So the Fed, I think, and you know what, this is just one man's opinion. Listen, I'm commenting on what I'm reading and hearing and seeing what the Fed's doing. But if I were in their position, instead of getting it 100% right, I would be trying to focus on getting it less wrong. And I think that's what they're doing. And is it less wrong for them to maybe hold interest rates a little bit higher for longer? Does it give them an out to make an easy correction if they see job loss starting to happen? Sure, they can just lower interest rates versus the really hard thing that we have seen it's hard to tamp down. It takes a long time and it negatively affects a lot of people in our country is when inflation ramps up. So if the Fed was too quick to lower interest rates, if they just discounted what potential effects tariffs could have, they could reignite this economy. Housing would be the very first thing that would get reignited if they made a substantial drop to interest rates. And then the information that they have is lagging to correct it as well. And it's much harder to tamp down inflation than it is to ramp up jobs.
True.
So that's just one man's opinion on it. But ultimately, what we have seen is that the Fed has held the rate steady. There's some interesting, I don't know what you want to call it, chinks in the armor, though, as far as how they came to this decision this time.
I was going to ask you about that, right? Like you were telling me that you were like reading into like the jobs report and a couple of different things. Like we just called tariffs air cover for them not raising rates, right? Tell me what they're covering for outside of maybe getting it wrong.
So some interesting things. The decision to not lower rates was on July 30th, I believe.
In support of our goals, today the Federal Open Market Committee decided to leave our policy interest rate unchanged. We believe that the current stance of monetary policy leaves us well positioned to respond in a timely way to potential economic developments.
Okay. And very interesting jobs report came out right after that. So the Fed did not have that information when they made the decision to keep rates steady. And when the Fed made the decision to keep rates steady, they said, we don't know, I'm paraphrasing, we don't know the effects of tariffs. And we believe that there could be inflationary effects from prices that are a result of tariffs. So we don't know. And then what they've also said is that the job market is, for lack of a better word, it's been resilient. The job market's been resilient. If they started to see the job market start to falter and start to see a lot of job losses, that may change their equation when it comes time for the next potential change, which is in September, if I'm not mistaken. So, but they didn't have this jobs report. So the tariffs thing is still hanging out there. They make their decision to keep the rate steady. The next day or within a couple of days, this job report comes out. Now, a jobs report is interesting because it looks at the jobs that are added. And it's all about the expected jobs that the economy is supposed to add versus how many jobs are actually added. So it's not about a number. It's not like if it's 100,000, it's good, or 50,000, it's bad, or whatnot. So what is the expected? Well, for July, the jobs was actually a little bit lower than expected, which is a sign that you could potentially have some job losses or not having as much job growth for the economy. It's a sign of potentially a weakening labor market. But what was also very, very important in that jobs report is the revisions from the previous month's jobs reports. And this is just as important or even more important because in May's job report that was revised means they reported in May. From that point, they actually went back, revised the number and lost 125,000 jobs just in May.
May's report was 125,000 jobs higher than what it actually was.
Yes. Okay. So that's what the Fed was using at that moment to make decisions whether or not to lower the Fed funds rate. They didn't have this information that they had been revised. That wasn't the only one. June, the same day that jobs report was released here recently, they revised May and June. June's new jobs added dropped by 133,000 jobs.
The forecast versus the actual job is not like that we lost 143,000 jobs in the U.S.
Correct.
We just missed expectations by 143,000.
Not necessarily that. It's whatever they told us the new growth was in May. I can't remember if we missed expectations or hit expectations there. Whatever they told us, it was actually 125,000 lower. So we missed it. At that point.
That's May, but then June, you said they all
same thing in June. So we missed it.
June. Okay, and we just released July. I was just
okay. So they revised May, they revised June. June, whatever they told us in June was the job number, is 133,000 jobs lower.
Okay.
So this is new information. Now, does this mean that there is some weakening in the labor market? We're starting to see some potential signs of this. This would be 3 straight jobs reports that we have been below expectations. Does that change the math and the equation for the Fed when they come and sit down and think about what they're going to do for the Fed's funds rate in September? We don't know. There's other things that are starting to potentially show some signs of potential weakening. But one really interesting thing, when the Fed gets together and they have this committee that comes together and decides, I think it's 9 or 11 bank presidents that make up the decision makers within the Fed. This last time, 2 of the presidents who have a part of that decision dissented from the
right.
opinion. They try to be consensus all day, every day. This is the first time in the last 30 years that you've had 2 of the bank presidents dissenting. They wanted to lower rates. So you're seeing some new information come out from this last report that I'm really interested to see what happens in September when it comes to the Fed's decision.